All right, let's look how axe head shape affects, um, let's say, speed of recovery during a fight. Here's a cold steel Viking axe. This is the older model, I think. But you notice how wide the cutting edge is compared to where it narrows down before it reaches the eye that goes around the handle. So if you go in direct and make a big wound channel, you know, there's a bit of action there, almost like a fish hook. There's a camming action where it gets hard to pull out. Now, in the Viking days, obviously, you know, you have a two-hand axe like this. Let me get back a bit so you can see. You know, you're going to swing, hit a target. You're going to kill the Anglo-Saxon, whoever the Vikings are fighting. But you're in a line of men. You know, you're in an army, basically. They're skirmishers. So I can afford to smack one guy, drop him, and my buddies are on either side of me fighting off the guys who might attack me if my axe gets stuck. And this action of pulling up, you know, out of the, put this back over here. Yes, in theory, if you get your hand up high, so instead of holding it on the, pulling from the bottom, I raise it up and pull out, I can extract out of the wound channel that way. But if there's any twisting, for instance, the enemy you're fighting falls down and there's a change in angle where you don't have that same wound channel anymore, it gets hard to pull out, you know, and the ribs will only break, you know, split apart so much. So it's one thing to have this design in war where you have multiple opponents fighting multiple opponents, and you may have time to pull, you know, to dig this out of a body. And another thing to use that same design when you're one-on-one or one-on two or three opponents, and treat it, you know, as they used to do it in warfare, where you have people on your side helping you. We'll go into more of that in a minute. Okay, here's the SOG version of the Peter Lagana Vietnam era Special Forces Tomahawk. I want you to notice how this bottom edge is swept or curved. And the reason for that is if it goes into a target where you're in between bones, let's say the ribs, that's a convenient way to illustrate it. I want you to notice how that curve acts almost, let's say on a fish hook analogy, like a barbless hook. It's much easier to pull out because you don't have that flare on the bottom, that angle. So this is a much more dedicated fighting axe or tomahawk design. You also see this with Doug Marcade's Colliehawk that he designed for RMJ Tactical, the big tomahawk manufacturer these days. And they do make some very nice designs, but you really have to distinguish between a tool, an axe that's primarily a tool, and an axe that has features that help it in a combat situation. So, you know, for something like this, you may go into a target and either in the cranium or in the ribs, you know, it will take a little less time to get out than a dedicated type of woodsman's axe, let's say. So, design element to think about. Okay, here is a Columbia River knife and tool kanji hawk. This was designed by Ryan Johnson of RMJ Tactical, the tomahawk people. And you'll notice there is a sharpened part of the beard here. And the idea is if you're going into building material, especially things like sheet metal, especially lightweight stuff on a airframe, or I think also in a car glass, you can use that to cut through and pull out of the material. This is a very good multi-tool if you want a hatchet as a multi-tool. There are features on this which help it as a fighting tomahawk, but I really consider this a multi-tool. You look on their website, on the YouTube channel, this spike obviously is very good for biting into masonry. They use it to break the hasp on a lock, on a padlock. This front edge is good for digging. This is sharpened across here. So yeah, and obviously you can pop somebody between the eyes with this and make a lasting impression. But this is really designed as a tool first that you could also use as a weapon if needed. Um, and I'll go into the spikes, different spike designs in a moment. But you know, this to me is a really good multi-tool. This is what I carry in my get-home bag, um, especially if I'm in an urban area and have to get out of, you know, have to get somebody out of a car if it's burning or whatnot. You know, this is good to break glass and open up a hole for your hand to reach in and unlock it, whatever. You know, on an auto glass. So, another element to think about, you know, because you see something on a fighting tomahawk, understand, especially like those RMJ tacticals with the sharpened beard on the bottom here, that's really meant as a tool to get through sheet metal or auto glass. It will help pull out, if it's really sharp, say on clothing, if you go into a body, but it's going to take some doing to get it out of ribs. I've worked a number of homicide trials where edged weapons were the killing implement, and it's a lot easier to get into the human body than get out with an edged weapon a lot of times. If there's any, you know, if you're going in any kind of widening of the surface, like an axe, you know, the spike is very easy to get in and out. We'll go into the spike idea in a moment. Okay, let's talk about spikes. The big tool in the back is my pickaxe. This is very useful in my area, upstate New York, with a lot of rocks in the soil. If you want to dig a hole with a hand tool, you don't start with a shovel, you start with a pickaxe, and that big, heavy, thick, blunt piece of steel will go through rocks and get around rocks and lift them out of the way, and then you can dig everything up with a shovel. So that's very similar to the spike you will see. Here's a cold steel warhammer. Both that and to a certain extent the spike hook, that was called a Corbin head or crow's head spike. So you can kind of see it looks a bit like the beak on a crow. And there's an angle there, which you also see on the pickaxe, because you're swinging in a circle, right? And you swing that, so that the idea of that angle on the spike will follow the end, will follow your arm on the circle. The old the spike on the warhammer in the medieval times was meant to go through plate armor. You have a thinner type of spike on the spike hawk. You know, hawks during the colonial period in America were going through thinner material than a medieval warhammer. And you also wanted to save steel. Steel was expensive. A lot of times the main body of the hawk was made out of just iron, and they'd put a more expensive piece of steel sandwiched in the cutting edge just to make use of that. You have a similar curvature on the Columbia River Knife and Tool Kanji hawk, in that you're likely swinging in a circle, semicircular motion, and this is meant to get into car glass or light masonry duties, or to remove material around a door lock or a hinge. And you notice it has a more or less tapered point than something like the spike hawk. This is meant to just go into animals and humans, probably go through the cranium. And that shape is tapered so it can come out easily. This is made from 1/4 inch stock, so the taper is not as severe, and that means you're going to get less likely to break the tip if you have to go through masonry work. Similar idea on this SOG Vietnam tomahawk, a fairly blunt spike, meaning that it'll hold up well if you have to go through masonry or other hard objects without. It'll dull, but it probably won't break or shatter the same way where a more long tapered tip may break off on you. So, something to think about on spike design. All right, one idea in my Learning Through Comparison series is I'm not telling you what tool to pick as a defensive weapon, but if you already have picked that tool, how to use it, how I would use that tool in a fight. So you might have a cold steel Trailhawk as a camping axe or a camping tomahawk. You might have a Columbia River knife and tool Kanji hawk as a multi-tool extraction tool. I carry this in my get-home bag, and it's not my primary weapon. I usually have a firearm on me if I'm in the U.S. But one thing we do is try to compare notes and what are the strengths and weaknesses of these weapons. For instance, I see a lot of people go and they'll fight with plastic tomahawks, in sparring, and they'll come in edge to edge, and then their edges lock up, and they get in a wrestling match here, and they could push through and hit, but there's a point where that initial point of contact, you have to worry about the tomahawk getting ripped out of your hands by if your opponent is stronger than you. One thing we do is, okay, how are you drawing that tool? With the Kanji hawk, I have a Kydex sheath. One tug, it's out of my hand, and the blade is exposed. However, most people are going to carry a tomahawk like this with the sheath on in their belt. So, and if you're going to get attacked, probably you're not going to have the tomahawk in your hand and the sheath off. Got to be dumb to attack you with that. So we presuppose that it's in your belt. You have to defend yourself. So draw it out. You're not going to have time to get that sheath off. So what we'll do is we'll spin it and use the hammerhead as an impact weapon first to buy us time to get that sheath off, if more defense is necessary. What that also affords you is, if we use this in this series, we'll go a number of weapons. We'll do bowie knife, kukri, and axe, to literally learn through comparisons how to each weapon, each tool function against each other, the same tool or the other tools. So if you go axe versus axe with a straight-sided hammer pole like this Trailhawk, you'll find that it very easily slides off and prevents you getting locked up. Hold this so you can see. It slides off very easily and prevents lockup compared to going cutting edge to cutting edge. Interestingly, I have a pipe hawk buried somewhere in my basement. I got to dig it out. But because that has a barrel shape, that will get locked up in the cutting edge. So you really want to look at each tool and the individual strengths and weaknesses, the function of it, and different factors as you're using these tools. The whole series is about a learning device, a technique of learning, comparing different tools, their strengths and weaknesses, and how they play off each other. So something to think about as you look at this series.